I'm John Diamond, and welcome to the second Entuity Tech Talk of 2019. Today's session will be showcasing some of the new enhancements to Entuity Network Analytics included in the latest Patch 5 release. We have a good representation of our North American sales engineering team here today to be your guides. Along with me is Larry Balon and Pete Bartz. A few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. The call is on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. Feel free to ask questions at any time via the chat panel. We will have time at the end to take questions that have been posted. Today, we'll be using Entuity Network Analytics, commonly called ENA or 17.0. And our BMC customers know it as Entuity Network Analyzer for TrueSight. ENA is the upgrade to Entuity 16.5. For those who are still on 16.5 or even any early release and are planning to upgrade this year, please don't hesitate to contact your Entuity system engineer. We're more than happy to discuss any facet of the new product with you and help you devise an upgrade path that makes sense for your organization. Patch 5 includes a host of enhancements that will equip you with more device support and ways to get more value from ENA. So let's jump right in. We've got a lot to cover today. I'm going to begin by showing you the new Meraki, that's the Cisco Meraki support that has been added as part of this patch. Now, previously, even before Patch 5, within ENA, we did have support for the Cisco Meraki wireless access points. That's the MR range of devices from Cisco Meraki, and that was implemented by SNMP monitoring and polling of the cloud-hosted management platform from Cisco Meraki. The way that the Meraki range is implemented is that you have physical hardware, devices such as access points, and you also have a controller which is cloud-hosted. It's a service that is provided by Cisco Meraki, and that links to your hardware and provides the configuration support for that hardware. Different types of Meraki hardware are monitored using different techniques, and the access points were monitored via SNMP to the cloud controller, not to the devices themselves, but to the cloud controller. What we've added in Patch 5 is the additional support for the other types of devices from Cisco Meraki, such as the access switches, which are the MS range of devices, and you also got the multifunction routing devices, which are the MX devices, and there are a range of other types of devices as well. There are some camera support, some endpoint support, and a variety of other types of devices. Now, these are managed using a subtly different technique. They actually require two forms of management to get the complete range of information from the devices. We perform SNMP management of the devices themselves, unlike the access points. With these other types of devices, they require SNMP monitoring of the devices themselves. But in order to get a complete range of information for these devices, you can't gather that all using SNMP, and we perform direct API integration to the cloud management platform in order to gather a complete set of information for the devices. Now, as you would likely have one instance of a cloud-hosted management platform. You can have multiple, but let's just describe it with a single instance. You may well have a multi-server deployment of Enturity, and for various reasons, you may want to perform the SNMP monitoring of the Meraki devices from different remote servers. That is fine. You can distribute your monitoring around, particularly if you've got a global deployment. That can be distributed however you wish around the various remote servers. However, you would only manage the cloud-hosted management platform via its API from a single remote server. However, because that information needs to be distributed among all of those instances of the individual hardware monitoring, we have a mechanism in the back end that shares it across all of those devices, no matter which remote server they're being managed from. I'm going to show you what this looks like. First of all, let me go in and take a look at an instance of one of these cloud controllers. There's various information that's going to come up here, which focuses primarily on the various organizations. You can have multiple organizations under one account, and that account is tied to a key that you're provided by Cisco Meraki, and that provides you information on your devices and only your devices. So you could have multiple. We've just got one here. If I select this, I'm not going to drill down on it through the hyperlink, I've just selected it, then these other parts of the dashboard are going to be populated in relation to that particular organization. In this case, I've got a single MS-120, which is an access switch. I've got a couple of these multifunction routing devices, and I've also got an access point. These are split between two different networks. I could have multiple different networks here, and this is a way of organizing your hardware within the cloud controller in a way that makes sense to you. If I were to drill down on this first network, you're going to see that there are two devices here. There's an access point and an access switch. Various information is provided on the access switch. If I were to then drill down on the access switch, then you can see here that within the context of the cloud controller, we are showing various information about that switch, but that's not the be-all and end-all. I've also got that switch under SNMP management, and the system has automatically associated the SNMP personality with the personality and the information gathered from the controller. If I were to go and drill down on that link, it will take me across to the SNMP instance of the device, and not only will we see a large amount of information gathered from SNMP, but this has been augmented with this other information which is being added to it from what was gathered from the cloud controller. So this is the composite of information which has been SNMP monitored and gathered from the cloud controller from its API. So that means you get the best of both worlds. As far as the rest of the monitoring, it looks like just like any other switch. You can see all of its ports. Here there's just one port active, and if there was something connected to it, then that would show up as a host in the ordinary manner. You can drill down and get ordinary standard forms of traffic, faults, discards, and everything that you would expect to from a switch. If I were to go take a look at one of the other devices, here, if I were to take a look at what I have under management, here's one of these routing devices. I'm going to go in directly here. This is the SNMP monitored instance of it, which is also augmented with information coming from the cloud controller. And again, you've got all of your standard information. If I were to go drill down on the attributes, you'd see everything that you would expect to see from a typical routing device. So that's an important aspect of how we are merging together the extended range of information that is gathered from SNMP and from the cloud controller. One additional bit of note on here, we can take in event information from the cloud controller. That is actually sent out via SNMP traps, but because that lives in the cloud, you must realize that that would need to come in through a public-facing IP associated with your Enturity remote server that is actually managing the cloud controller. That must also not have any form of NAT relationship, so it must be a direct form of connection, probably via port forwarding for security purposes. So the next thing I want to show you is what we've done with the way that we help you with error conditions, particularly errors within the user interface, things that we need to help explain to you at runtime. And there's a number of things that we've done here. I'm going to go over to a different server, and I'm going to log in. And this server has actually got a problem. And you'll see once it populates what the problem is all about. In this case, what I've done is it has a remote server, but that remote server is offline. So I'm talking to the consolidation server. It has a non-responsive remote server, and that is being clearly indicated with the red highlighting of the menu, the dashboard menu here, and all of the dashlets in this dashboard have got red outlines clearly indicating that there's a problem. You may have noticed when it first populated that it told me which remote server was at fault. If I were to drill down on the menu, then it's clearly going to tell me here that I've got this particular remote server unreachable. That is unambiguous and clearly a problem that would need to be addressed. If on a dashboard that you had built yourself, there was a problem with one or more of the individual dashlets not being configured properly, they would be shown up highlighted in red to indicate that there is a problem specifically with those dashlets. If I were to go and take a look at an individual device, so if I were to go down here, let me just take one of these devices here. That error, by the way, is related to the fact that that remote server is offline at the moment. So here, if I were to go to the attributes dashboard, you'll notice that those top three buttons on the screen, the edit attribute, show history, and show on chart buttons, are grayed out. What we've now done is where you've got a grayed out button, we now, when you put your cursor on top, will explain why it is grayed out. So that will help you understand, particularly if that came as a shock to you that you expected to be able to use that button for a particular function. It will explain why it currently can't be activated. So that will help you with runtime guidance as to how that can be used. And that wraps up everything I was going to show you about the error handling framework. One thing I wanted to show you, back on talking about the Meraki, if I were to go back and go to the online help, this will go to the ENA Help Center online. And just as an illustration of the information we have available, I'm just going to search for Meraki. What you'll see is a number of articles coming up here. I'm going to go to the very top one, and that will give you information about how we used to monitor the Meraki access points prior to Patch 5. But if I were to go and take a look at what we've done in Patch 5, then this article goes into great depth about what we've just been talking about, including a list of the various attributes that we're gathering from each individual different type of technology, and some further information down the bottom about how that's used. So lots of information online for that. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Larry, and he can tell you about some of the other contents.
Thank you, JD. Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Balon, and I am a system engineer for Enturity. Let me just and I'm going to be talking about 4 additional features of Patch 5. So let me just share out my desktop here and go to full screen mode. So the first thing I want to talk about are the discovery enhancements. So we've added some enhancements to auto discovery. So if I'll browse over to the device inventory page, and you'll see that this looks similar to what it used to look like. But when I click the auto discovery page, you're going to see where the changes are. So we've added the functionality to be able to add profiles. So what you're seeing here is a result of an upgrade. So once the patch is installed, there'll be a default auto discovery pop-up, and then if the auto discovery utility had been populated previously to Patch 5, there's a profile that is named pre-patch settings. And if I go to this, you'll see here that there was a previously configured auto discovery for this IP address range. We give you the ability now to add multiple profiles. So for MSPs, if you needed to run, for example, auto discovery for specific customers, you can create profiles for each of those customers. So I'll just add a new profile here, and I'll just name it. We'll name it Tech Talk. I add that, and the pop-up window comes up. One of the other things that you'll notice with the auto discovery pop-up window is that in the excluded sysoid section now, there are descriptions for excluded sysoids, so you know what's being excluded. This list here is the standard default list of sysoids that we exclude from discovery. You have the ability to add additional sysoids and add descriptions for those. And the other thing that we've added previous to this was that you'd have to select each of these individually to remove them. There's now a remove all button that allows you to remove them all. But I'll quickly go through an example. I'll just select an IP address range. And I'll leave everything else default. Hang on here. Would help if I put the correct address range in. There we go. So I just picked an address range here. You have the ability, again, to schedule this. And the schedule remains the same. You can run it every day. I could run it on a specific day or a specific time. You have the ability to add discovered SNMP devices to inventory. And if I click this button, it will allow me also to add those to a specific view. So if the view has been created manually, you can select a specific view that you want the devices to be dropped into. And I'll just close this. And it will run the first time here, and you can see here that when it runs, it'll give you a last finish time, and it will give you a hyperlink to look at the results. And again, there's nothing in this IP address range, so there's nothing to be added to inventory. The next feature that I'd like to talk about are that we added for Patch 5 are timeframes on dashboards and dashlets. So if you were observant when JD was running his part of the demonstration, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of the banner, there's a time frame that's listed. And again, there's some mouse overs here. It's grayed out. It will only be highlighted if you're on a dashboard that supports time frames like a chart, for example. And the default when you log into the system is to set that time frame to the last 24 hours. So I'm going to migrate over to a device. We'll just pick our California router here. And you'll see that now it's highlighted. So the default is showing the graphs at the last 24-hour time period. And again, if there's a pull-down menu that allows me to select different default time frames. There's a custom time frame that you can apply to the dashboards, but for this example, I'll reset the time frame to the last 7 days. These graphs will auto-update. And so now, if I go, for example, to another dashboard that has charts, such as the ports dashboard, you'll see that that setting is maintained. This is maintained for the duration of the session that the user has with the Intuity server. If you log off and then re-authenticate to the server, this is going to reset to last 24 hours. We have changed some of the behavior of the way that the charting tool works as well. So I'll bring up a chart here. There's a change time frame button. So if you want to change the time frame, for example, for one of the chart dashlets so that it doesn't lock into this dashboard time frame, I can click the button here, and again, I can change this. I'll change this to the last 24 hours, and you'll see that this chart updates to the last 24 hours. And it will identify that as well. When you open up the chart in a new tab and you want to change the time frame, again, you select the configure chart from the pull-down menu, and if I go into the chart settings, you'll see that there is no setting for the time frame. Again, the default setting when you open the chart in a new window is to lock the time frame to the dashboard time frame. I actually have to shut this off, and then I can change this to a different time frame. And I'll change this to the last 4 hours and then save that. And the graph will reset to the last 4 hours of metrics. So it's just something to be aware of. It's a minor change. But again, when you come into the configure chart dashlet, once I shut it off, it will be displayed. But by default, this slider button is set to the on position. The next thing I'll talk about are enhancements to the top end tool. So I'll go back to my dashboard interface. Again, previous to patch 5, the top end tool was limited to displaying top 5. So I'll bring up the top end dashboard. And this is our standard out of the box top end dashboard. Again, in the upper right corner, this time of the dashboard itself, there is a top 5 selector. And here you can, again, select from top 5, 10, 20, 50, or 100, or you can set a custom value for the top end. Changing this selection will change all of the top end graphs in all of the dashlets that are part of this dashboard. If I want to change a specific top end, I just go to the triple dot menu on the dashlet I want to change, and I can change the top end here. Again, the default is to use the dashboard setting in the upper right-hand corner of this web page. All I need to do is shut this off. And if I wanted to look at I'll look at the top 15. I click done, and now this dashlet changes to the top 15, and there's also an indicator below the name of the metric that's being displayed as to what top end it is. The same applies to this top end. The default setting is top 5 when you log into the system. If you if you change that setting, it remains in effect for the balance of the session. And once you log out and log back in, it'll default to top 5. Then the last section I'll talk about of a new functionality is in the area of account management. So I'll go to the account management section. And we've added a couple of different enhancements. So there's a global settings here in the upper left-hand corner of the account management page. These settings affect users that authenticate locally. So you have the ability to time out a user after a certain period of activity. You can lock the account out after a number of failed login attempts. And so if I set this to, for example, 3, and click the OK button, you're going to see here that I get a pop-up message indicating that I have to put a time frame in here. So the time frame is from a minimum of 1 minute to a maximum of 10,000 minutes. You can also set age requirements for the password, and you can also enable a warning that will warn the user X days in advance of when their password needs to be changed. Anytime you change this, there's a checkbox here that will allow you to update the existing user settings to use global user settings. By default, they're independent of each other. So if I select the user down here that's already been configured and I click the user settings button, you can see that the override global user settings button is checked. The second button here is for password complexity. So if I open up this will bring up a pop-up box that will allow me to set password complexity policies and then password policies in general. You can enforce a password history so that the user can't use previous passwords, and that limit is a number from 1 to 10. And you can enforce a minimum password length. And then there are several checkboxes here to add additional password complexity settings, such as requiring numeric characters, requiring special characters, etc. And there's also a checkbox here that will enable a one-time password on user creation. And I'll just demonstrate this quickly. So if I create a new user, I have the ability to key in my own password for this user. I'll check the box off here, or there's also a password generator button that will generate a one-time password. So I'll just copy this. I'll click OK. That user's been added. Now if I log out of the system and log back in, using that password, I'll be presented with another screen that allows me to set my old password and then assign a new password or change my password upon the first login. Now, I'm not going to change this. I'm just going to refresh the browser window, and I'm going to log back in as the administrator. And I'll go back to the account management page. And you'll see for the users, there's also a status. So you can see here, this is the new user I created. I didn't change my password, so that was a one-time password, so it shows the status of expired. So this user will never be able to log back in unless I come in here and change the user settings or assign them a new password. The other thing, the other change to the account management page is that we will keep track of when the last time a user logged in and when their last active time was. And the final change for the password expiration, if you are configured to use LDAP or external authentication, password expiration messages will be displayed at login as well for those installations that utilize LDAP as an authentication mechanism. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Pete.
Thanks, Larry. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Let me share my screen out.
Hang on, here you go.
All righty. Now we'll give it a try. There we go. So in addition to some of the topics that we've covered earlier in our session today, there's 3 more that I'd like to go over. There's a couple new out-of-the-box dashboards that are included in Patch 5. The first one that you can see here is for ping-only devices. So this is a default dashboard that'll get added when you do the patch. If you have a custom dashboard that's already set up for ping-only devices, and you might have already done that, this is something that will probably preempt that out of the box, because when the patch gets installed, this dashboard will be placed in a higher precedence. If I actually looked at all the dashboards in my system here and took a look at the device dashboards, you'll actually see some of the dashboards that I've got, and you'll actually see this new summary dashboard right now that's been added in the system. If you have a custom dashboard and would continue to use that and want to use that, all you'd have to do is change the order in the list to make that one a higher level dashboard in the list. So if you want to use the out-of-the-box one, this one will be here. If you haven't created a custom dashboard, you'll see this again right out of the box. So a custom dashboard for ping-only devices, not a lot of information that you're going to pick up other than information about the device and latency and any issues that are going on. In addition, we've added another dashboard for QoS. So for Cisco QoS, we've actually created a dashboard that allows you to see the children of a second policy map on a device. So you'll actually see all the children listed here, regardless of the policy maps or embedded policy maps that have been configured. It's something that you might have been looking for previously, or actually it does depend upon your QoS configuration that you've got in the system, but this is something that we just added in, and you'll see that if it applies to your QoS configuration. The next topic that we'd like to cover is an extension that we've made to the remote terminal access. So, if I'm looking at a device, you've got the ability to either SSH or Telnet via remote terminal action from the Intuity system here. So if you have a multi-server configuration and say you've got a polling server sitting halfway across the world at one of your sites or at a customer site if you're an MSP, if you use the remote terminal functionality here, we'll actually proxy from the Intuity consolidation server to that polling server and actually run the SSH or Telnet commands from there. So if I actually did that, I'll get a pop-up window asking me to log in either via Telnet or SSH. The extension that we've made in Patch 5 includes the addition of this Show History button. So traditionally, out of this browser, it was not possible to copy and paste in and out of this window. In addition to that, if I'm looking at this, I can't really use my mouse button to scroll up and down. So the Show History actually lets me get access to a very large buffer of the history that I've been generating in that session. So I actually just did a show run command on one of my systems here. I've got access to everything from the point that I logged into it. The other thing with this window, as it's a pop-up, and it's just a standard web-based text window, I can now cut and paste out of this into another application, into a notepad, text editor, or anything that you need to be able to do. So you can get access to information from this pop-up, from the show history, and actually get the information out. The last topic that we'd like to cover today is along the lines of what Larry was talking about when he was covering some of the account management changes. In addition to the password changes that we've made, when you look at this, there's a couple other columns that you'll see. The logged in column here and the active sessions. So these 4 columns, in addition to the password status and some of those changes, have been added in Patch 5. What we're doing is we're tracking the active logins for all of your customers. Now, all of these, especially some of my large customers, they've got a lot of users. Certainly you can scroll, based on any of these columns. But I can actually see who's logged in, and I can actually see how many sessions they've got logged in. So actually, as an admin right now, I'm logged in 4 times on different browsers and different browser tabs. So I've got 4 active sessions that have actually been active over the past hour. Now, you may see a case where you see that somebody's logged in, but the active sessions count might be 0. And the reason for that is we still see them as having a logged in state, but their active sessions, they haven't had any active sessions over the past hour. So that counter would be 0. Once they actually go back and start doing something in the UI, that session counter is going to start ramping up to whatever the number of sessions that they've got going on. In addition, and Larry mentioned this, you're going to be able to see the last logged in time and the last active time. So the last logged in time would be when they actually logged into the system. The last active time is going to be the last time they actually accessed some resource. They launched a dashboard or they did something in the system within the UI. So these are all accessible from the account management screen. But as an admin, you also have the ability to see the total number of active users. And you can see that if you take a look at the main menu and go down to the bottom here, you can actually see active sessions. Now, the active sessions right here, this is only going to be available to administrative level users. But this is a real quick way to actually see how many sessions you've got logged in here. So I think with that, that covers all the topics we've got for today. Well, let me stop sharing. We'll go back to the presentation here. There we go. All right. So keep in mind there's a variety of helpful resources for you to quickly find information about ENA. This is just an example from the Intuiti Help Center, but the totally updated Help Center is searchable and has an incredible number of videos to aid in your understanding of ENA. And also, all our Tech Talks are recorded and available for your use from the Intuiti YouTube Center. The next Tech Talk is scheduled for May 22nd, and the topic will be high availability and disaster recovery. And we hope that you'll be able to attend. If you have any further questions about today's content, be sure to contact your Intuiti system engineer. We're here to help you get more out of ENA. And lastly, should you have any suggestions for a future Tech Talk, let us know. Send your ideas to tech.talks@intuiti.com. Thanks again for attending today's session, and we look forward to seeing you again on May 22nd for our session on high availability and disaster recovery.